Okay, well, welcome back from our fluid adjustment break. I love that. I was at a retreat this weekend and I heard somebody say the water in, water out break. I like that too. We're getting pretty creative with these things. I'm Jeannie Delaplane. I am the Kinship Care and Guardianship Program Manager at DCYF at headquarters, which really it just means I do a lot of policy writing and troubleshooting complex cases and things like that. So Ryan asked me to talk about one of my most favorite topics of all times, and that is resources for kinship caregivers. So I'm going to share my screen. I was practicing while we were on break, and I think you can see just the PowerPoint, right? Wonderful. I love it when it works. Okay, so I'm going to talk about kinship resources. You know, guys, I think about these folks and they're just, I don't know, the most amazing humans in the world. But before we talk about the resources, I want to make two distinctions because sometimes when it comes to resources, it matters. So there are two types of kinship caregivers. There is what we refer to as the independent or informal kinship care. Those are the folks not attached to DCYF. And then the formal kinship caregivers, those are the folks that are attached to DCYF. And so while really they do the same thing, there's differences in services. Okay, keep that in the back of your mind. I'm also a numbers person, so I just want to show you some stats. I think these are remarkable. And what I want you to look at is the line where it says, in Washington. So nationally, we have and I like to look at 2019 because that's like the most complete data set that there is. So what we know nationally was that there were in this state, 77,000 kinship caregivers in this state. 41,000 of them are with grandparents. And then you take those numbers and you break them down to, now let's look at how many of those are served by DCYF. 3,900. That is your number. So who's serving, and I always like to ask this question, who's serving the other 73,000 kinship caregivers out there? Well, the answer is a lot of times nobody. And I think that's where we need more services. Okay, so now let's look at DCYF. We've been working really hard at this. We have kids in and out of home placement. So this number, I have to tell you guys, rotates daily. It shifts. So if you look at my slide, you'll see this is the number on 10/10/22. That was when this number was pulled. There was 6,300 kids in placement. 54% were in relative care. 46% were with not relatives. And then the breakdown of those that are with a kinship caregiver. And when I say kinship caregiver, I'm talking relatives, and I'm also talking suitable persons, friends, family members, coaches, teachers, whatever, godparents. So we had 75% of those folks are unlicensed and 25% are licensed. So, okay, let's talk about the best kept secret in the state of Washington. Kinship navigators. So when we talk about resources, hands down, best resource there is for a kinship caregiver is a kinship navigator. Now, they are only located in 30 of the 39 counties in the state. If you are in the peninsula or in Kitsap County, you do not have a kinship caregiver, a kinship navigator to assist you, but you do have area agencies on aging which can provide some of the same services. So this should be number one go-to resource for all kinship caregivers. And you access, I always just Google it, dshs.wa.gov or DSHS kinship, and it'll take you straight to their page, and you can find all sorts of amazing resources and how to find a kinship navigator in your region. Okay, number one resource most kinship caregivers are looking for is financial. So financial pretty much everybody can get a non-needy child-only TANF grant. It's based off of the child's income. And so if a child is getting Social Security dollars, then they're not probably going to be eligible, or maybe for a tiny grant, but it's based off of the child's income. One of the things that happens though, one of the little glitches that we see that happens is that TANF workers forget they're not supposed to ask the caregivers for their income information. And so we just need to teach folks they don't have to answer that, or sometimes go ahead and answer it, because what we also know, I've talked to a lot of grandparents lately, and what they said to me was, well, when they asked me those questions, I wasn't excited about answering them, but what I did learn is that I was eligible for food stamps, and I was also eligible for childcare. So that was part of the reason that they had asked, but it is based on the kid's income. And if you put stuff in chat, I'm not likely to see it. Okay, let's see. The next slide. So let's talk about information for our informal or independent kinship families. And so if the term independent kinship family is new to you, this is a term that's being used nationally, as opposed to informal, because informal families don't like to, they feel like they are real and they need to be acknowledged. So they like to be considered independent kinship families. So they too can access the child-only TANF grants, but also there is an emergency assistance fund that's accessed through the area agencies on aging or through the kinship navigator programs. And these dollars are set aside to help kinship caregivers, specifically relatives, help with all sorts of things like rent, utilities, clothing for the kids, furniture, if somebody needs a crib, if somebody needs a car seat, but that would be how you would access them. So for formal kinship families, we have monthly foster care reimbursement, there's licensing support dollars, and there's also concrete goods. So these are if you're associated with us, with DCYF. So let's take a look at the difference. I like to think of this slide as if you're associated with the DCYF, if you are a formal kinship caregiver, this might be a reason to go through the licensing process. So if you only receive a non-needy TANF grant, it's $417 a month. If you're receiving foster care reimbursement, depending upon the level of a child and the age of the child, you would receive anywhere from $672 to $810. But here's where the disparity comes. So when you're licensed and you have multiple children, you get multiple amounts. But when you have TANF and you have multiple children, it's about $111 more for each child. So in a household of 3, you would get $654. In a household of 3 with a licensed caregiver, $2,106. That's a big difference when you're trying to feed and clothe kids. Child-specific license was something that went into effect August 1st of this year. It was a result of House Bill 5151, but it created a new WAC. The whole point is it's supposed to help license more caregivers, remove some of those barriers from licensing, and enable so our kids can have the financial support that they need. So hopefully we will see more kids stay within their communities with their families, and it will happen a little bit faster. We also at DCYF have the Kinship Caregiver Engagement Unit, the KCEU for short. I have to tell you this, it is not located in all regions. It's only in about half of our regions right now. So the whole point behind the Kinship Caregiver Engagement Unit, I like to say it's concierge services for a kinship caregiver trying to go through the licensing process. Their whole purpose is to handhold a kinship caregiver and walk them through the process of the home study, help them gather the information for licensing, and they also have resources that can help stabilize the family, and they can also connect and link folks to resources. But again, this is for those connected to the DCYF system. Legal information. So there is some legal information, and this is like a resource that folks want. So this is when we do these studies with our kinship caregivers and we ask them what are those resources that they need. Number one is always finance, right? But usually number two is legal assistance. And so there are some things available for legal assistance. You're probably all familiar with that new Uniform Guardianship Act, although I guess we're a year and a half into it, so it's still new. There are some forms, there's some FAQs out on the court system, on the Washington courts portal on this, and they're pretty helpful. The only thing is about the new guardianship rules is they're complex, and while it was supposed to create a uniform guardianship process, it did not do that. And so every county is a little different. And then there's also some understanding the court dependency process, how the child welfare system works, things like that. But here, let me show you some new legal resources. So this doesn't look new. Mm-hmm.
Before you get there were some questions on the previous slide. If these kinship become foster license, then are they pushed towards permanency and they lose all those benefits?
So, Annette, I'm not 100% sure I understand.
Annette, maybe you can come to the mic and ask your question clearer.
Yes. So the kinship goes into foster parenting, goes through all the licensing programs, and now they're being pushed into guardianship. Well, as soon as they're into guardianship, DCYF signs off on the case, and then they're on their own and they don't receive the foster parenting money anymore. Is that correct?
I don't know that I would frame it like that, Annette, but let me frame it back to you how I would say it. With the legislation 1747, it requires DCYF to, number one, place with relatives.
Mm-hmm.
But number two, we have to talk about guardianship prior to filing termination paperwork and filing for adoption. It's not a choice. It's now law. And so because of that, you see us having a lot more conversations about guardianship. What I've also been told is that we have to be able to have legally justifiable reasons as to why one permanency plan is better than the other. So do we still do adoptions? Absolutely. Do we do guardianships? Absolutely. How do you get to which one do you do? That goes through the shared planning meetings, and it's also what is in the child's best interest. So there's no like one better than the other.
Actually, that's not what I meant. I meant like in my case, I have a kinship. They're not in the guardianship program right now. For the last year, they've been taking care of the children. Mm-hmm. They can take care of the children. If let's say she decides to get licensed for foster care, okay, she gets licensed for it, but then there's still the guardianship being pushed at her. And once she takes on the guardianship, she loses the foster parenting money. Is that correct?
So it depends on if she's eligible for RGAP. And so if a lot of times people like to just call it the guardianship, but or RGAPing. So RGAP and adoption support are pretty much the same. I have a slide later on for you to see the differences. It's pretty much the same, and it's the same amount. So when you go into permanency, whether or not it's guardianship or whether or not it's adoption, the subsidy would be the same. There are a few little differences, but they're pretty much the same, especially the dollar amount.
Okay, if they can't do the foster and they're just kinship guardians, they're still being pushed into, I'm sorry, right now they're just kinship placement. So if they're being pushed into guardianship, they lose all the financial support.
I don't, so unless they're RGAP'd. And so if somebody isn't eligible for RGAP, and that's a long, complicated conversation, but basically it's 4E eligible, a relative who has gone through the licensing process and have had the child 6 months post licensing. That's the short version. If you meet those eligibility requirements, then you are eligible for RGAP. And so you would continue to receive, depending upon how old the child is, 80, 90, or 95% of whatever the foster care dollar is. So you would continue. If you don't, if you're not eligible, so this is where I say to you, this is unfair. If you're not 4E eligible, you're not eligible for RGAP. And that's because this state does not have a state-funded RGAP program. Now, with that being said, we have an ask into the legislature this year to create a state-funded RGAP program. So folks that are not 4E eligible would be able to receive benefits. Because if you are not 4E eligible, the only recourse you have financially is the child-only TANF grant, which is a lot less. And then, yes, you're right, they do lose the benefits.
Amy, just in a short description, can you help explain what 4E eligible is for those that might not know the reference that you're making?
So Title 4E is where the funding comes for RGAP subsidies, and also, just to be honest, it's also where adoptions come from. But the guardianship, that's our only funding source in this state for RGAP subsidies. And so we have to go by their rules, and the federal rules are very black and white. Has to be a relative, has to be licensed, have to have the license with the kids for 6 months post consecutively. And then they have to be 4E. So 4E eligibility also, there's like a lot of so I'm not a 4E expert. I'm just going to say that. But generally speaking, the number one reason people are not eligible for 4E is because the parent is over income. Now, here's the other thing that you just want to pull your head out and go, what is the Fed thinking? So 4E eligibility is based on 1996's federal poverty limits. It's crazy. So now you take 1996, I did not misspeak, 1996's federal poverty limit and Washington State's $15 an hour minimum wage. A lot of folks are not eligible for 4E. So fingers crossed, we will create a state-funded guardianship program this year. And then people who are not 4E eligible then would be.
Okay, because I mean, they're at the poverty line and she has not been licensed or all that, but that's okay. I got what I got. Thank you. I don't want to take up.
No problem. Were there any other questions before I go on?
Thanks, Jeannie.
I have one question if we have time.
Sure.
We're about 3 months away from guardianship in my case, but the kid is currently placed with a relative that we're kind of unsure about, and looking at some other relatives. So with the 6 months prior, having to be a placement, has this other relative who the kid's not currently placed with already missed their window of opportunity to receive RGAP funding? Like if they're going to get guardianship of this kid and they haven't been the placement, is it that they can be a guardian for 6 months and then they can get the funding? Or is it that they had to have been already the placement for the kid prior to the guardianship?
Okay, so I don't want to talk about specific cases, so I'm going to talk about generalities, okay? So to do a non-subsidized guardianship in this state, a person has to have had the child for 6 months before you can finalize the guardianship. But that's non-subsidized. So now let's talk about subsidized. To be eligible for 4E, to be eligible for RGAP, the case has to be eligible for 4E, number one. Number two, it has to be a relative of a specified degree, as in listed in our statute. Then the relative has to be licensed, and then they have to have the children in their care 6 months, consecutive months post licensing. So that's That's the sequence. And so I always get this question: will you wait for people to catch up before closing a case? And the answer is, of course, we're going to wait, because we want a family to be stable. And so we're gonna, we might have to like come back again and go to court, but we would want a family to be stable if they're eligible for RGAP and it's coming down the line that all they need to do is get licensed and hold that 6 months. So
Jeannie, with that new legislation that you guys are pursuing for the state-funded RGAP, has there been any discussions about reducing that 6-month time window?
no, there hasn't been. Because that's kind of like a federal standard, and that is a federal standard. And so we kind of mirrored the federal standards to the state standards, with the exception of 4E eligibility. And so that means people who were over income, when the parents were over income, not the guardian, but the parent. And also it would include tribes who are not the 4E tribes. That's complicated. And then it would also include what we refer to as suitable persons, but friends, family, coaches, teachers, folks like that.
But to Gabriel's point, sometimes we have these kids that are they've been in with the same relatives for a long time, like a year, then decide to get licensed because that's how we are going to be ending the case. And then they have to get licensed, which is a couple-month process. And then we still have to keep the case open for another 6 months after they get licensed.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if there might be some opportunity in there as you guys are pursuing that new legislation to get state-funded RGAP. Maybe they could help close that window, and that could be one of the other elements.
All I can tell you is they've been looking at doing it so there's parity in the two. And the federal requirement is 6 months. And when I say 6 months, I also just want to say to you, it's consecutive 6 months. So for example, and I'm going to use January to June because it's easier for my brain. So let's say we get licensed officially January 28th. You are eligible to close your case with your RGAP June 1st. It's 6 consecutive months, not 180 days, right? Got that? so that's the other thing. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Legal information. I want to share with you guys this. Guys, the Title 11 guardianships are they're new. They took the place of the non-parental custody order. You guys all know that. So finally, and you may have seen this pamphlet before, the options for grandparents and other non-parental caregivers. This is a pamphlet that's been around, or a booklet that's been around for a while. But if you look for the one that says 4th edition, revised September 2022, this has the one that has the new information on the new Title 11 guardianships. And so that is finally out. Next really cool thing, last year during the legislation season, we were successful in getting funding for a kinship caregiver legal hotline. So the really cool thing is it's called LARK, LAARK. I don't know what it's at. Okay, legal advice, something kinship. I don't remember what it stands for, but they give legal advice and referrals. The way it works is a kinship. You can only, right now you can only access this through a kinship navigator. So if you have a client who needs legal advice, they should reach out to a kinship navigator and ask them to have somebody make a referral. Once they get, and this is because it's just getting up and running, like literally it started last week. They will expand it out come January, February, so you can just make a referral on your own, but you can reach out to this hotline, leave a message about what you need. An attorney, they will sort it to the attorney who can best help you, and then the attorney will call you back and you will be able to get help with some narrowly defined services, but also legal advice. Okay, so I see something Oh, thank you, Luanne. Legal advice and referral for kinship care. So this is brand new and we are so excited that this is here because kinship caregivers are like, they've been asking for this. And so again, 3-step intake process, kinship navigator completes the web form. Then LARC completes a conflict of interest checklist, check to make sure they're not representing anybody. Sets up an appointment, and then the caregiver has an appointment time with an attorney, free legal advice. Let's see. Healthcare resources. So for our independent families, all families in the state of Washington can apply for Apple Health. It is based on income, so sometimes most people qualified. And then we also hear frequently consent for healthcare. So informal, independent families, you know, these guys, they have like it's a pinky promise, or like there's a little note that says John can have my kid and stuff like that. So what happened was a few years back, there was some work done in the legislation to create this document. And this is a declaration, and it's authorized by RCW 7.70065, and it is a declaration of responsibility for minor health care. And this allows a kinship caregiver to be able to access health care for the child in their care. Now, this is for our informal families. For the formal families, you get a chipper, you get a whole bunch of other stuff. That's not an issue. But this is for our informal families because it is an issue for them. So this is what it looks like front and back. And like I said, physicians, dentists, everybody, they're aware of this form, so it doesn't give you any hang up. Healthcare resources for our formal families. All of the children in out-of-home care have medical, vision, dental, medical coverage. They have coordinated care, and it's fairly, I'd say it's not fairly easy. It's okay to access. It's accessible. And then behavior resources. Gosh, guys, this is like the void out there, right? Behavioral resources for kids right now. If you can find one, that's amazing. But there are rapid round services through WISE program. And you can go to this website and find behavioral health options. It's difficult. There are long wait lists. That's just true. Education information, resources. For the formal families, we have the foster care program and treehouse advocacy. And then for all kinship care families, OSPI has children and family of incarcerated parents support, and they also have the McKinney-Vento folks and our homeless liaisons. A lot of times they're all the same person, so they just kind of like figure out which program fits the kid best, which is kind of helpful. But those are all available. And then there's also PAVE. PAVE is a wonderful organization. If you have a child who has a disability, they have a lot of advocacy work for supporting kids with disabilities. Can we get a copy of this with the links? Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And then childcare. So in this state, we have Working Connections childcare. It is income-based if you are not a foster parent or a kinship caregiver through DCYF. And even if you are there a DCYF, you still have to have somebody who's working. I wish there wasn't that qualifier, especially with our kinship caregivers, because a lot of our families are older, maybe retired, have disabilities, and it would be nice for them to be able to have access to childcare. But Working Childcare Connections Childcare has federal requirements that they have to go by. And then informal kinship families, and this is again for informal families, not families that are connected to us. PAVE also runs the Lifespan Respite program in Washington. You just go to lifespanrespitewashington.org. You click on their link, you fill out an application, and they can help pay for respite. They have respite options, and they have a lot of respite options throughout the state.
Jeannie, quick question. For those relatives that are on RGAP and the dependency has been dismissed, do they also lose then their child care subsidy as well?
They do now. We
Are
used to be able to build it into we used to be able to build it into the RGAP monthly payment, but we aren't able to anymore.
Is that a federal restriction or a state restriction?
It was a federal interpretation.
So that might not be, so that might be another reason why a family might be disinclined to.
Oh, absolutely, it's a barrier.
Okay,
Totally. Oh no, Ryan, we're on the same page.
gotcha.
When they took that away, it was like, what? Because I mean, which would you want to do? Pay $2,000 a month for childcare or have the state pay it? So what I will tell you though is there is a program for childcare that if you have been, if you have just recently, if you've become a guardian or you've adopted a child, there's a year. They have a year subsidy program that you can still receive childcare for one more year, but that doesn't help if you have an infant, you're still going to be able to have to pay for that. So no, I understand. Other resources, there's the PASS programs. I love the PASS programs. So the Washington State Parks program, that is right now restricted to just the families that are attached to the formal. And what they do is they show they have something they show to the park and it gets them in for free. They're working on expanding that right now, this legislation to our informal families. That's why I say right now. And then the Pacific Science Center, the Seattle Aquarium, and the Woodland Park Zoo all have PASS programs for kinship caregivers, both formal and informal. So that's pretty exciting. And then training, and Luanne is up next, and she's going to talk about the programs at the Alliance that they have. So then information for the formal kinship caregivers. We have a lot of publications. These are supposed to help answer any of your questions, but they're good resources. They help, define like how do you get licensed? What's the process? Things like that. So there's a lot of those resources. And then, as I promised, there's the subsidy slide. So this is the guardianship and adoption support array of services. And so if you are able to exit in a guardianship or an adoption support, you've negotiated adoption support, benefits are medical and dental, you can have access to training, monthly cash payment based on your foster care maintenance amount. So that's 80, 90, or 95% of whatever that is. And it's based on the child's age. The older the child, the higher the percentage. And then the non-reimbursable adoption expenses or / guardianship expenses. This is negotiated in the RGAP agreement. So it's not just go do it on your own, but it's negotiated as part of the agreement. For adoption, it's up to $1,500. For RGAP, it's up to $2,000. And then counseling, this is another, there's a little difference here. If you adopt, the purple is adopt, you can have access to pre-authorized counseling for youth and EBPs, but you do not have that access if you go through a guardianship and you have an RGAP subsidy. And, a family needs to, we all put our heads together and we choose what is going to meet the best needs for the child. It's not about push guardianship, push adoption. It is what is in the best interest of the child when the child cannot return home. And then
Jeannie, I know I'm thinking about this in terms of CASA advocates and kind of bringing the family into that situation as well. Is there any kind of where a family or a relative placement can kind of go and just ask and say, what are my options here? And what are the pros and cons? What would you suggest, if we've got a case that's at that point?
Oh, yes. So every region has a position called an RGAP gatekeeper. We also have, we call them POFs, but they're permanency planning facilitators. So when we have shared planning meetings, that's when you can say, hey, I would like more information about this. Now, here's the thing is, it's really awkward to talk about the nitty gritties of these type of details when the parent is sitting there. And so maybe it's more appropriate to ask the RGAP gatekeeper or the permanency facilitator, hey, could we have a separate meeting where I can ask those questions? And I know that they do those, especially with the new requirements of talking about guardianship prior to filing termination or looking at adoption.
Could you give us a list of those RGAT gatekeepers? Could you include that so I can send that out to folks?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm just curious, who are they gatekeeping from?
I know we hate the title, or at least I hate their title. They call it, I would like to refer to them as guardianship specialist, but right now they refer to them as RGAP gatekeepers. Their job, their role really is to, there's a checklist of paperwork and steps that have to occur for an RGAP, and that's their role, is to make sure all those get checked off.
Maybe RGAP navigator instead of gatekeeper, just
I
in
know.
terms of being
Oh.
family friendly.
I so agree with,
Okay. I'll talk to Ross about that.
or like my image is a troll under the bridge, right? Because you're the gatekeeper. Yeah, no, we talk about this frequently. And then this is my favorite publication of all times. This is the DSHS publication called Grandparents and Relatives. We affectionately refer to it as the Do You Know booklet. And you can access this online, but it is the best summary of all resources for kinship caregivers in one spot. And so this is just a fabulous, fabulous resource. And again, DSHS puts this together, State Unit on Aging. And then I am, this is me. So if you have questions or if you want to reach out to me, you are more than welcome to do that at any point. So now I'm going to stop sharing so we can all see each other again. And I'll ask if you guys have any questions for me.
I have a question for you. I really don't know how this part works. I'm just kind of curious to get a general idea, but like, how invasive is a home study?
Well, Katie, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I just,
ton of questions.
yeah, I just did one to pursue unaccompanied minor immigrant children. Since I work in the system here, I can't have local foster kids, but it's the same process. It's a lot. There is, and right now it's still paper. I think they're moving to an online system. You know, you have to explain all of the different adult relationships you've had. If you've been divorced and married, you have to provide documentation of that. So if you're thinking, consider a grandma who maybe got divorced 40 years ago, now she's got to try and dig up this piece of paper for that. You have to submit letters of reference. So friends and family who are going to speak to not only, how you parent, but do they think that you should have somebody? So I had to talk to my mom about it to make sure she didn't try to tank me just because she was thinking that she was protecting me from taking on too much. There's all these nuances of the questions. You have to provide proof of vaccinations for your pets. If you're on a well, you might have to have a water test. You have to go to the doctor and get a note that says that you're physically capable of doing this. If you are in any type of mental health therapy, if you go to counseling, you have to get a letter from your therapist that says that you're okay to have kids in your home. And then there's a lot of questions about your parenting style and how you would manage different situations. You have to create an escape, plan from your house and draw pictures of that. You have to have all of your meds locked up. You have to have all of your alcohol locked up. they come through your house multiple times. So I would say it's pretty invasive, you know, and then they're doing the background check. So depending on what your background is like, you have to explain that. I went to a non-traditional boarding school as a high schooler, and they wanted to know all about that. So they really want to know everything about you and the people in your household. They interviewed my teenage daughter. So yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. And I didn't have any additional kids in my house, you know, so again, it's one thing if you're doing it as a foster parent where you're doing it when you have time and because you're choosing to, versus the grandma who's already got 5 little kids in her household. I mean, and now is trying to squeeze in all of these things.
Yeah, that sounds.
Oh, and then there's training.
Yeah.
There's training, there's first aid training that has to be done in person. There's a bunch of other things too. So yeah, it's a lot.
Could I add to that also? As a relative care provider, it's super confusing. It's not just getting licensed. It's like when the child's placed in your home, they're placed by the social worker who's going to do a cursory walk through the home and do the background check. And then they're going to make a referral to licensing to have the home study done. Meanwhile, the SAM, the people that are going to check on all the health and safety things are going to do a drop-by of that home. And so you have a kinship care provider who's thinking, well, the social worker is my main contact person, and they're going to be introduced to 5 different people and processes within their first month. So it's really confusing for them to figure out who's who when they have no system knowledge. If you're a foster parent, you've researched this, you've come into it, you're prepared as a kinship provider with that emergency placement. You haven't done your research usually. So it's all new, it's all overwhelming. And then you have the additional grief that you're going through because now you're taking, you know, your child's child and you're going through that grief. So there's a lot going on for them. And a lot of the things that Katie was talking about are changing with the new electronic process that they're going to. The state's on a pause right now, taking foster care licenses until March, but they are still processing kinship licenses, and they are starting those with the new online process of going completely electronic, no more paperwork. Which is
Can you
another
repeat that, Luanne? They're not processing any more foster parent licenses if you're not kin?
They're putting them on a wait list. They're on a pause. So we don't want to say that they're not processing them.
Sure. Okay,
It
sorry.
sounds like we're closing the door, but they are on pause is the term that they're using. And yeah, they are putting people that are wanting to get licensed through DCYF on a wait list, otherwise referring them to child placing agencies that are licensing still.
Okay.
Luanne, does that also include, does that also include a pause on the foster care training through the Alliance?
No, we are encouraging folks to stick with that and get their training and everything together. And then when DCYF takes themselves off hold in March, people can just jump right on the licensing process because it'll all be electronic by then.
So, but I just want to be clear in case we hear it through the field that social workers say, no, we've canceled all foster care licensing. You are still doing foster care licensing for kin.
Still doing kinship licensing, only pausing on foster care licenses through the state, still doing them through child placing agencies.
Pausing stranger care, not relative care.
Yeah.
Okay. You heard it here, guys.
Yeah. And Jen, you had a question about, you know, if maybe all of these hurdles can explain the shortage of foster parents. You know, I think we might all have a slightly different perspective. I think, I don't know if those hoops, I mean, it is a lot in the front, but again, when you're choosing to do that as a foster parent and the kids aren't in your home, it is doable. I think sometimes the bigger barriers, or not the barriers, but foster parents don't always understand all of what foster parenting entails. And I think the lack of understanding, at least from what I have seen, is It's not just this quick and easy way to an adoption of a small, cute little baby. There's a lot more that goes with it, and that can be what is more challenging to keep the foster parents.
The other thing that I've noticed along those lines too, I've taught the caregiver core training class for 30 years in one form or another. And like the last 10, 15 years or so, the focus kind of shifted to foster with the intent to adopt. And like all of our classes just changed overnight when that concept went into place. We went from having a class of 30 interested foster parenting people to maybe 5 interested for foster care, everybody else interested in foster to adopt. And so that was a shift. And now the shift has gone to kinship focus first. And so with that, it seems like there's, the focus is not on foster to adopt, and now it's on kinship, which makes it seem like we have a shortage of foster parents and people not applying. They're still applying at the same rate, but we're having to refer them out for different services in a different way. So it's kind of a growing period right now. That's a little confusing to folks, in my opinion.
Luanne, I'm curious about the online application process and what that looks like and will look like for families who might not have access to tech or who are non-native English speaking.
Yeah. Jeannie, are you more knowledgeable about this than I am?
Yeah, so I've sat in on a lot of the meetings. First off, let me also apologize. I have some construction going on, so they've just started pounding. So my apologies. So my understanding is there's a button that you can switch languages on the website on Venti, but they called it WACAP as opposed to WACAP. It's very rapid. And so
No relation. Yeah.
no relation, same letters. And so there are supposed to be folks that can help navigate this. So if there is an IT barrier, if there, any of that, there will be people that can help. That's part of the caregiver engagement unit we'll be helping with that. So, I mean, there's going to be bumps along the way, but hopefully it'll get worked out pretty quickly. And it should go live, I think, the beginning of December.
It's live as of yesterday, I believe, for them learning it. It's not going live for DCYF until March 1st, but they're using it to train to do kinship applications. So they're putting that through the process. What they're doing now in this 4-month gap is trying to upload licenses that are pending and get those put into the new system so people can practice on those and learn. And then they're changing a lot of the requirements, like you don't have to bring your marriage certificate or your divorce decrees and all of that thing anymore. So going back and researching, 40 years of where that piece of paper may be lying. A lot of things are going to change. It's going to be easier. I've been on the committee for this and have been a test dummy. And I did it from a foster parent perspective. And it's very, very easy as far as click this button and there's a drop down menu and then you add information. So if you are, and I am not computer savvy, I'm not tech savvy at all. So I was a good test dummy for this. And it was very, very easy to use. But yes, the kinship the engagement unit, I always get their acronyms mixed up, are still able to go out in person and help folks that need the paper copy, and then they will be able to navigate that with whatever agency is working at it. Sorry, didn't mean to bring up that can of worms. Shall I jump into mine? Okay.
Yes, please.
So share screen. Oops, I forgot to bring up. Sorry, let me bring up my presentation first so it will share the right
Hey, you're
screen.
doing better than I did. So
There we go. Okay, so we being me and my cohorts are the Alliance Cares project. And for some reason, when I bring this up, I'm sorry, one more time, I need to bring up my notes so that I share everything that I thought was really important. And now when I start speaking, I will forget to share it. So let me bring those up real quick and then I'll share my screen again. Okay. I guess I can't do both. It won't let me in. Okay, so we are the Caregiver Retention, Education, and Support team. And how you may have known us before was Fostering Washington, I believe, was the previous contract providers for the retention. And previously, the contract was recruitment and retention was done by both. And 2 years ago, when they offered this contract out, they split that. So DCYF has the recruitment piece, and then the Alliance took the retention piece, and that's where CARES comes into place. So we contract with DCYF to support caregivers around the state, and we try to be informed on everything that you just heard from both Katie and Jeannie. We have mentors and staff that we are learning. I think we've been to Jeannie's training a few times already, and I still learn something new every time she goes through slides. So we're constantly learning new information to support caregivers. But how you can access support is just by contacting us. And you can also have those that you're working with contact us through an inquiry form on the DCYF website, or one of our community partner websites have a form that they can click on and say if you want more information about foster care. And those inquiries come to CARES, i.e. me. I see each of those every day, and we respond to those with an email welcoming them and giving them more information about foster care. They can also be referred by the child social worker, licensing, community partner, whoever they're working with, can put in a request for us to have more contact with their client. And then we're also working with the Kinship Caregiver Engagement Unit and the Navigator Program to receive referrals from them as well. So once we have an inquiry, we send out that email that introduces the CARES program and tells them more about how to go through the foster care licensing process and resources that are available to them. You may hear some of our specific CARES team names. Jean Brunel is our program manager. And she told me not to talk effusively about her in great appreciation. I think she's a great role model, but she said that's too much. So you didn't hear me say that. And then we have Shauna Burris, who is our lead mentor coordinator, and Krista Murray and Angela Steiner are our community engagement coordinators. And we have Krista on the west side, Angela on the east side. And then my role is the kinship and licensing coordinator. So I help folks that are going through the kinship licensing process, as well as foster parents going through the licensing process. And then we also have mentors. We have, I think, 13 mentors right now who cover all 6 regions in the state. And our mentors are either current foster or kinship providers, or they have been in the past. And they work alongside our caregivers in every stage of their journey. They share their experiences, they provide a listening ear, they provide guidance, they give resources for community resources and support groups. Anything that care providers need help with, our mentors are there to help find an answer for them and to get them those resources. So our mentors also check in once I help folks through the licensing process, then I kind of turn them over to a mentor. And our mentors will check in with them when they get their license. They will check in to see how things are going, you know, how that process worked, and celebrate with them. Then they check in with them during their first placement. and try to walk through that first night with them. How did that go? Are there any questions you have? Was it what you expected? That kind of thing. Then they check in at the 6-month process. So once they've been doing this for a while, how's it working? You know, how are things going? Is there anything else that we can do to help support you in your journey? We also have at this point 6 specialists that are available for added expertise in different areas. So we have an Indian child welfare specialist. We have 3 Spanish speaking specialists. We have someone who specializes in working with medically complex children. We have our LGBTQIA+ specialist. And then we are just onboarding our community connectors. We just hired 8 community connectors around the state who are going to start helping with our in-person projects and our in-person meetups. Since COVID has been lifted, we were doing everything, via Zoom. And now that we're back in person, our community connectors are going to help us get those community supports back together again. We hear from care providers that they miss that in-person support group type thing that has been going on. So our website, I didn't put it in there earlier when I said something about you can refer people to our website. It is alliancecares.org. And this is what they will see when they go to our website. We have a lot of different resources that people can go through. If you don't mind, I'm going to bring up the actual live website just so you can see it. We have the home, which just introduces and lets them see the topics across the top of the page there. And then there is a section about us if they want to find their mentors. We have the CARES information here, what we do, and then they can just click on the region that they live in and it'll bring up the mentors that are servicing those regions. So it's really easy to look at the mentors, find the one for their region and contact them. Sorry, make you dizzy there by doing this. And then we have our resource page that list all of the supports that we have just been talking about. We try to keep this current. You can see that there is a kinship caregiver resource page. And if they click on that, it gives them information on guardianship and our gap in adoption. And then we list all of the things that they can access for community resources. So the discounts and the free things to do in the community that Jeannie was talking about earlier, like the camping and all of that, is listed here under our guide to free and discounts. The TANF application and help with that is there. The brochures that Jeannie had in her slides are here as well. So if you lose the information that you have on that, you can always come here and find it. So that gives our kinship folks specific information around kinship. And I'll talk a little bit more about all of that. And then the other thing that I think is really, really good is our support groups. And I will talk more about those in a moment too, but I don't know if any of you had experience with our Alliance catalog previously for training. It was changed this summer along with all the other DCYF changes that went on with WAC changes and all of that. Everything kind of hit at once. And I personally find the catalog page now harder to use and find what I want. So we have it listed here, the special events that they can come to. Our Coastal Jam, our Native American specialist, provided a workshop on the Coastal Jam ethics and that kind of thing. We had 82 care providers show up for that this last couple of weeks. And then she's going to do one on powwows in November. So really good things that we're offering. We also offer a support group for, not a support group, a book club. We have books that we read to caregivers and their children. So Wednesday at 7 p.m. It's the book that they're reading this month is Waiting is Not Easy. And so we have caregivers come with their children. The person that's sponsoring the evening does a little craft project with them and then reads the book. And then a name is drawn and we send that book out to one of the children that participated in the group. So I think that's really fun. We have a lot of drop-in discussion groups. We work in tandem with coordinated care and Harborview, and we have nurses and doctors come in and talk about medical issues. Our sleep challenge one is the one that is next, December 21st. But you can see some of the topics that have been covered in the past with that. And then we also have an educational one that we do. The next one is supporting the academic success of your student. And that's happening on November 16th. And then we have medically complex children support. I lead a fostering as a single parent group. I did most of my fostering of 25 years as a single foster parent. So I empathize with them and the special things that they need. So I support that in a group. And then we have all these supportive facilitated discussion groups. I think we're up to 21 different groups that we're sponsoring right now. So those include book clubs, which if you have people that are needing to have, like we do the Connected Child, Karen Purvis, and the Connected Parent, we have an FASD book club, and then we have Dancing with a Porcupine. So people are really liking those. They respond really well to those. And then one of the other ones that I would like to recommend while people are waiting is the While You Wait courses. These are created for those that are waiting in their licensing. And the first one is preparing for change. So talking about how life is going to change once they start fostering. The second one is making placement decisions. The third one is transitioning a child into your home, what that first night looks like, who's going to be handling bath time, how traumatic is that going to be to the child, all those hands-on kind of normal daily life things that we don't think about when it's a stranger or a child that's in our care that we haven't had for a while. And then meeting children's cultural needs. So that is there. And then I'll quickly, sorry about your eyes here as I scroll up. The other tabs we have are allegations and investigations, which I'll go over in a minute. We also have a Spanish speaking page that we try to post most of our things in Spanish, and then a contact us. So that is there. So the kinship resources that we have, are totally available on our website, and they can also contact us and have a mentor assigned to them. We also have our Facebook page that we have one for general foster care and we have one for kinship caregivers. And we try to put resources out there and information about community events, any supports for kinship providers. And so when I'm done talking and have my chat box back, I will drop those connections in the chat section. Some of the other resources we talked about, this is the page that I always do this when I train. I jump ahead and then have to say, oh, we covered that. So this is what was on the kinship page on our website. So these are all the categories. The one thing that we started talking about a little bit earlier was the kinship core training for our kinship providers. It used to be that if you were going to get licensed for foster care, you need to take the caregiver core training class, which is a 24-hour class, and it has a field experience and an individual support session with one of the trainers at the end of it. That was decided that that was too cumbersome for relative care providers. And so what they have done is create a kinship core training course. And that one is 12 hours. It's 4 sessions that are expected to last 3 hours. It's an online course, but the requirement is kinship providers only have to take 2 out of the 4 sessions. So they don't have to do all 4 of them. They're welcome to, but in order to get licensed for the child specific to their home, they only have to do 2. And then they don't do the field experience, and they don't have to follow up with the individual support session. So that's the difference in the 2 trainings. If a kinship provider wants to get licensed for regular foster care so that they can have other kids come into the home, then they do have to go through the caregiver core training course, because that's different. And then you can see that we do offer different kinship related courses there. We have Kinship 101 information that relatives and suitable others need to know when they're coming into the system, and it goes over a lot of the things that were discussed today. The 4 sessions for the kinship core training are navigating the system, growing up with trauma, grief, and loss, understanding and managing behavior, and nurturing connections and community. So if a worker has been working with a family and they know that they are struggling in a certain area, they can recommend that one of the 2 sessions that that care provider takes is very specific to the issue that they've been working with them on. So that's kind of how that referral goes for 2 sessions. Otherwise, they're encouraged to take all 4. And then we also have other courses on the Alliance webpage that people can take. They go in and they set up a profile, and then that gives them access to take any of the hundreds of courses that are on our Alliance catalog. We have relative kinship caregiving, which is navigating change and supporting the child in your care. We have the Kinship 101 that I just mentioned, and we also have an individual learner-centered skill development on Kinship 101, where they can meet one-on-one with a trainer and ask specific questions and get more knowledge about the system. Let me look at my notes. Everything I do is bring up my notes and then I don't look at them. And our first program is part of our contract as well. The first program is if a care provider is going through an allegation, whether it's licensing or a child abuse investigation, we support through either of those. They can call the 866-393-6186 number, and one of our staff will be at the other end for a listening ear. We don't provide any legal services, and we don't do any advocating for foster parents or care providers, but we do provide a listening ear and resources and support in helping them advocate for themselves. So those calls are all confidential, and if folks just need a listening ear when they feel traumatized during that portion of life of being investigated, we're there to help support them through that. So you can contact us a variety of ways. You can email us at alliancecares@uw.edu. You can give us a call. And by us, I also answer the phone for the CARES program. So you'll get me at the other end, 206-221-4913, or you can use my personal phone number, 253-904-5454. And then we also have, this is the last page on our website. So you can go to the Alliance Cares Facebook page from there in the Kinship Caregiver. And you can also subscribe for our email list. And then something else that we have for the community is in working with our community partners. If anybody is doing a special event for kinship or foster care, they can notify us through this website, and we will post that on our Facebook page to get the information out to our providers. The end. Any questions or anything about CARES?
Thank you, Luanne. That's super exciting.
Yeah.
I always love listening to your presentations. There's so much going on.
Yeah, and we add to almost every day. So yeah, love working with CARES team.
And I think the big piece for our advocates that are on here, right? You know, Jeannie mentioned earlier, the best kept secret. we want to be sharing this far and wide and making sure that our families know what this is. So you don't have to be the expert in that, but having just a baseline of like, oh, I think there was something I learned about. Let me go find that out for you. You know, that's all that can make all of the difference in the world, is just remembering, oh yeah, there's this thing, and really push them to get the support that they need so that they can figure out what they need, that we're not forcing that on them or leaving them hanging. So thank you everybody so very much. Ryan, anything you want to close us with?
Oh, I have one other thing
Oh,
that
Jeene.
I'd like to pitch for.
Yeah.
Hey, so part of my role is I get to facilitate the world's best meeting every month, and it's the Kinship Caregiver Oversight Committee. And the whole point, and I just dropped the flyer, an invite into it. Anybody who works with community kinship caregivers are welcome, but we also would like to have kinship caregivers participate. And the whole point behind this group, it's legislatively creative. It's been in effect for a long time. But this is a group that whenever any of the agencies want to put something together, they run it through kinship caregivers through this venue. And so we meet monthly, we talk about state policy, local initiatives, any concerns. This is the committee that was instrumental in getting that the LARC program put together, and also more recently the good cause waiver for TANF. And they worked with ESA, and ESA was really wonderful. They're making the good cause waiver for TANF a lot easier for kinship caregivers. It'd be better if they would just blanket make everybody exempt, but they couldn't do that because of their federal requirements, but they did make it easier. So you guys are invited, and please share with anybody that you're working with, because we would really love to have their voice, our caregiver's voice. Okay, that's my pitch. Thanks, Ryan.